from the Collected Histories of the Western Mediterranean, 3rd edition, compiled at the University of Carthago Nova, 2024 CE. Chapter 14. The Sack of Rome, 216 BCE, and the reshaping of the ancient world. Following the catastrophic Roman defeat at Cannae on August 2nd, 216 BCE, the Carthaginian general Hannibal Barca consolidated his forces near Capua. His cavalry commander Hannibal famously told him, "You know how to win a victory, Hannibal, but not how to use one." In our timeline, Hannibal agreed. But in the alternate record that follows, the Carthaginian council, rather than Hannibal alone, voted to authorize the march on Rome. Supplies were requisitioned, the column moved. This is that history. And yes, before we go further, you should know we're speculating. Rigorously, but speculating. The march took roughly 2 weeks. Rome at this point had no significant defensive force between Capua and the city walls. The Roman Senate had already debated fleeing to Sicily. Some senators did. The population panicked. The Servian wall, built after the Gauls sacked the city in 390 BCE, was Rome's main defense. It was old. It was not designed for a siege by a professional army. According to our alternate record, the siege lasted 11 days. Not because the walls were strong, but because Hannibal wanted a surrender, not rubble. Hannibal's goal was never to destroy Rome. It was to break Rome's grip on its Italian allies, the Samnites, the Gauls, the Greeks of the south, and replace Roman hegemony with Carthaginian. That's the real Hannibal, by the way. The historical Hannibal. He said as much to his own officers. On what our alternate historians date as September 14th, 216 BCE, a delegation of Roman senators emerged from the Esquiline Gate carrying terms for negotiation. The terms Hannibal offered were, by ancient standards, relatively moderate. Rome could keep its internal governance. It would surrender Spain, Sardinia, Corsica, and Sicily. Rome would pay a war indemnity, 4,200 talents of silver, to be settled over 30 years. And it would release all Italian allies from Roman obligation. Rome signed. The Senate voted 18 to 12 in favor of the terms. 3 senators walked out rather than agree. Now, here's where the textbook tone has to stop for a moment, because this is the part where real historians actually disagree. Could Hannibal actually have taken Rome in 216 BCE? Maybe. His supply lines were stretched thin, he had no siege equipment, his army was tired. But Rome at that moment had fewer than 10,000 trained soldiers left inside the city. The math isn't kind to Rome. So let's say the city falls or surrenders. Let's re-enter the alternate record. What does the world look like 5 years after? By 211 BCE, Carthage controls the western Mediterranean. Spain is a Carthaginian province. Sicily, which had been contested for decades, is now firmly Punic. Carthage's economy explodes. Silver from Spanish mines flows directly into Carthaginian coffers instead of Roman ones. The Carthaginian merchant class, which was already the most sophisticated trading network in the ancient world, becomes something like a proto-global economy. This isn't speculation, this is extrapolation from what Carthage was already doing before the war. They had trade routes to West Africa, to Britain, possibly to the Azores. Now give that network unchallenged control of the Mediterranean, and you get something the real world didn't see for another 1500 years. Rome, meanwhile, is diminished but not dead. It's still a city of 300,000 people. It still has its legal traditions, its senate, its Latin language. But without its Italian tribute network, Rome can't fund the military machine that built its empire. It becomes essentially a regional city-state. The Italian allies, Samnites, Lucanians, Bruttians, get their independence, which is genuinely good for them, at least at first. Now here's the thing. Most alternate histories get wrong about this scenario. Carthage wasn't a conquering, Romanizing empire. It didn't absorb cultures. It traded with them. Rome spread Latin. It built roads that unified language, law, and infrastructure. Carthage was not built to do that, which means the Mediterranean stays fragmented. Culturally diverse, yes, but also politically unstable. Fast forward to 200 BCE, 20 years after the sack. The alternate record notes something Rome's historians in our world would find unthinkable. Greece is not yet under foreign control. In our real world, Rome conquered the Greek states between 200 and 146 BCE. Without a powerful Rome, that conquest never happens. The Macedonian kingdom is still intact. The Seleucid Empire in Syria still holds. The Hellenistic world keeps ticking along, fractious, brilliant, and free of Roman administration. And here's where it gets strange. The alternate record, speaking now with full awareness that this is projection, suggests Greek science keeps accelerating without Roman interruption. Archimedes died in 212 BCE when a Roman soldier killed him during the sack of Syracuse. In the alternate timeline, Syracuse stays Carthaginian allied. Archimedes lives. He's probably dead by 190 BCE of old age regardless. But 20 more years of Archimedes and a Greek world not subject to Roman consolidation changes what survives. The Library of Alexandria, in our world, damaged multiple times and eventually lost, sits in a Mediterranean where no single military superpower is burning through the eastern cities. No guarantees it survives forever, but the odds improve considerably when the region isn't being fought over every generation. Now let's check back on Carthage itself, because here's the uncomfortable part of the alternate record. Carthage had a structural problem that Rome solved, and Carthage never did. Its military was almost entirely mercenary. You win a war, and then you have to pay an army of professionals who have no loyalty to the city-state. In our real history, Carthage experienced the Mercenary War, a devastating revolt by unpaid soldiers just after the First Punic War. It nearly destroyed the city. After winning the Second Punic War, in the alternate, Carthage is flush with cash. They pay. The revolt doesn't happen immediately. But the structural problem doesn't disappear. By 175 BCE, the alternate record notes the first mercenary disputes in Spain, local commanders demanding higher pay. Sound familiar? And here's something genuinely strange to sit with. The Roman Empire, for all its brutality, created political stability across a huge swath of the world for about 400 years. Carthage's network couldn't do that. That stability had a price: conquest, slavery, cultural erasure. But the Mediterranean basin without it doesn't become a paradise. It becomes a contested space with no dominant organizing force. Let's skip ahead again. 150 BCE. The alternate historians date this as the beginning of what they call the Age of the Five Leagues. Carthage is dominant in the west. The Macedonian successor states still hold the east. Rome has reorganized into a mid-tier Italian power. Egyptian Alexandria is thriving. And the new force is rising in the north, the Celtic confederacies of Gaul. Without Roman legions pacifying Gaul in the 50s BCE, that never happens in this timeline. The Celtic tribes of modern France, Belgium, and Britain develop on their own trajectory. This is significant. The Celtic Iron Age cultures were sophisticated. Caesar's accounts of them, our primary source, were written by a conqueror with reasons to minimize their complexity. In our alternate world, there's no Julius Caesar. No Caesar because there's no Roman Empire to produce him. That lineage, that whole specific set of conditions, doesn't exist. No Augustus, no Pax Romana, no Roman roads from Scotland to Syria. The whole infrastructure of what we call Western civilization doesn't materialize. And here's where we need to pause and really hold two things at once. That's a loss. Genuinely. And it's also not the end of the world. Christianity as we know it doesn't spread the same way. The Roman Imperial Church, the Council of Nicaea in 325 CE, the whole institutional apparatus, was a product of Roman state power. Jesus of Nazareth may still be born. Judea is a real place with real people regardless of who governs it. But the Pauline Church spread along Roman roads in the Latin language, backed eventually by imperial force. Without that structure, religious pluralism across the Mediterranean likely persists longer. The Greek gods, local cults, Punic religion, Egyptian worship of Isis, all still competing in 200 CE. Which brings us back to Carthage itself, 100 BCE. The alternate record here gets uncomfortable. Carthage's slave economy was enormous. The silver mines in Spain were worked by tens of thousands of enslaved people under brutal conditions. We know this from archaeology, not just Roman propaganda. Rome did this too, of course. So did everyone. But the idea that a Carthaginian Mediterranean would be meaningfully more humane is not really supported by the evidence. The alternate record is honest about this. Chapter 15 is titled Continuities, Things That Didn't Change. Slavery, tribute economies, military coercion of smaller states, famine driven by agricultural extraction. These aren't Roman inventions. They're ancient world defaults. So what's different? What genuinely changes? Let's go back to the text. Language. This one is enormous. Latin didn't become the foundation of Italian, French, Spanish, Portuguese, Romanian, and the root of English. That entire language tree doesn't grow. Punic, the Semitic language of Carthage, spreads instead. But it's a trade language, not an administrative one. The Western Mediterranean ends up more linguistically fragmented. Celtic languages across modern France and Britain survive far longer. Possibly they never disappear entirely. The alternate record notes that in 50 BCE, the year Julius Caesar would have crossed the Rubicon in our world. The city of Lutetia, modern Paris, is a thriving Celtic trading town with a population of around 40,000. No Caesar crossing, no Rubicon, no civil war, no Roman Empire. Just a Gaulish town on a river, doing its thing. And now, here's where the textbook voice gets genuinely strange, and where the alternate historians themselves flag this as their most speculative section. What about Persia? What about the Parthian Empire? What about India and China? Because Rome wasn't just a Mediterranean phenomenon, it was a node in a global trade system. The Silk Road, in our world, operated partly because Rome was buying silk and spices from the east. Without Rome as an end market, the trade flows differently. Carthage likely picks up some of that trade. They're already buying and selling east of Egypt, but the scale shifts. Okay, time for the big jump. Let's go to 1 CE, not because the calendar means anything in the alternate. They wouldn't even count years that way, but because it's useful for us. The alternate world at 1 CE has no unified superpower in the Mediterranean. Carthage is powerful but stretched. The Hellenistic East is fragmented between successor kingdoms and a growing Parthian Empire. Rome is something like Florence in the Italian Renaissance, a significant cultural and financial city, but not an empire. It's got maybe 800,000 people. It's wealthy. It's relevant. This is genuinely one of the more unsettling details in the alternate record. Rome without empire is not Rome as a wasteland. It's Rome as a very successful city that never becomes the center of the world. The Latin language never dies. It's still spoken in central Italy. It just never becomes the administrative tongue of Britain and Spain and North Africa. Now here's something the alternate record gets into that most pop history versions of this scenario totally skip. The question of technological development. Rome was actually in some ways a technological bottleneck. Slave economies don't incentivize labor-saving machinery. Why build a better mill when you've got 10,000 slaves to run the old one? Carthage had the same problem. But the Hellenistic Greeks didn't, not to the same extent. Alexandria was producing serious mechanical innovation in the 3rd and 2nd centuries BCE. Hero of Alexandria built a working steam device, an Eolipil, in roughly 70 CE. It was treated as a toy. The question isn't whether someone could build it, it's whether the economic conditions existed to demand it. In the alternate world, with fewer slaves and more merchant pressure on labor costs, the alternate record speculates that mechanical innovation gets taken more seriously after 100 CE. Maybe not an industrial revolution in 200 CE, that's too far. But the conditions that delayed mechanization in our world are partially missing in the alternate. The alternate record doesn't claim a utopia. It claims a different set of problems. Let's look at 300 CE. By now, in our world, the Roman Empire is beginning its long decline. Diocletian is splitting it administratively. The pressure from the Gothic migrations is building. In the alternate, 300 CE looks like this. Carthage is dealing with its 3rd major mercenary crisis in a century. The Spanish provinces are semi-autonomous. North Africa is effectively self-governing. The Carthaginian city itself, the actual city in what is now Tunisia, is still the largest city in the Western Mediterranean. Maybe 700,000 people. It's genuinely extraordinary. But the political structure is oligarchic. The Council of Elders, the Gerousia, roughly, is dominated by merchant families who resist any reform that threatens their trade position. Sound familiar? Merchant oligarchies are a recurring feature of trading empires. Venice did it. The Dutch Republic did it. Carthage was doing it first. The strength and the weakness of Carthage in one image. A city run by very smart, very profit-oriented people who are extraordinarily good at trade and extraordinarily bad at building loyalty. So at 300 CE, what does the alternate record say about the broader world picture? China's Han Dynasty has collapsed in our world by 220 CE. That happens in the alternate too. It's not connected to Rome's fate. The Three Kingdoms period still occurs. The Gupta Empire in India which rose in our world around 320 CE. That still happens. Developments in the Ganges Plain aren't contingent on whether Hannibal sacked Rome. So the alternate world by 300 CE has a powerful but oligarchic Carthage, a fragmented Hellenistic East, a modest but culturally rich Rome, independent Celtic confederacies in Northern Europe, and the same great Asian empires cycling through their usual patterns. It's a messier world than ours at 300 CE, but it's not obviously worse. Okay, let's do the pullback. Here's the part where the alternate historians break voice and speak directly to you. Everything you just read was plausible extrapolation grounded in real historical forces. It was not prophecy, it was not certain. There are at least a dozen other trajectories this could have taken. Carthage could have collapsed in 150 BCE in a mercenary revolt. The alternate world could have seen an aggressive Macedonian expansion into the west. Climate, disease, drought. History is made by more than politics. The most honest version of alternate history isn't a clean story from point A to point B. It's an acknowledgement that the branch points keep branching. But the broad strokes hold. A Carthaginian Mediterranean probably meant more linguistic diversity, less Latin, no unified Roman Church, a slower Romanization of Europe, more commercial sophistication earlier, more political fragmentation, more cultural pluralism, and the dark side, more persistent instability in the Western Mediterranean for centuries. Now let's go back into the textbook. One final entry from chapter 22, The Question of Rome, written for students encountering this alternate history for the first time. Students sometimes ask whether they should mourn the Roman Empire that never was. The answer the alternate historians give is, that's the wrong question. Rome's empire produced some genuinely extraordinary things. Aqueducts that supplied clean water to 1 million people, legal frameworks that influenced rights theory for 2 millennia, roads that let ideas travel. It also produced 2 centuries of near-constant military expansion that killed millions and enslaved millions more. Both things are true. Carthage was not morally superior to Rome. It was a slaving, tribute-extracting, commercially rapacious empire. Different methods, same basic power structure. What the alternate world offers is not a better world. It offers a different world, one that is recognizably human in all the ways that matter, including the bad ones. The real lesson of alternate history, and the alternate textbook makes this explicit in its preface, is what it tells us about our own world. Latin didn't have to become the root of European languages. It happened because one general won a battle at the Trebia River and another general decided not to march. Christianity as the dominant religion of the Western world was not inevitable. It spread through a specific empire, in a specific language, enforced by specific emperors. The things we treat as permanent features of the world, the languages we speak, the legal systems we inherit, the religions that shaped our cultures, they're all contingent. They all had branch points. There's a moment in 216 BCE, real, historical, documented, where Hannibal Barca stands just days from Rome and decides not to march. We'll never know why. We have guesses. Supply lines, siege equipment, political calculation, they're all plausible. Maybe all of them together. That decision or non-decision echoed forward for 2,000 years. The language you're listening to this in. The legal concepts that underpin your rights. The religion, if you have one, that shaped your moral vocabulary. All of it downstream from a man who stood at a crossroads 2,240 years ago and went the other way. End of chapter 20.